So, it's really important to make sure that you're checking all your sources because you can have 10 sources with different information. So, I really like to pull records whenever I can. So, I'm ensuring that what I'm communicating when I'm writing a story is as accurate as possible.
Tune in as we give flowers to Black men and women making waves in the audio industry. I'm your host, Sidney Evans, and this is Beyond the Threshold. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beyond the Threshold. I'm your host, Sidney Evans, an award-winning audio editor and producer. For those of you who don't know, on this show, I interview Black men and women working in the audio industry to highlight the lessons and experiences it takes to achieve success in the field. So I would like to say this about today's guest. So there are some people in the world who are like respected for like what they do. One thing that stands out to me is that I appreciate her and respect her for who she is, because she's an advocate for so many causes, very compassionate, and she makes no hesitation about being open about the causes that she stands for. And we're actually going to do a little bit of that today. So without further ado, today's guest, Jamie Albright. Welcome to the show, Jamie.
Thank you, Sydney. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for that warm introduction. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Absolutely. So how we connected, me and Jamie worked together previously at the company that I work for. And I'm gonna do things a little bit differently today. Usually I kind of just jump into the background of the guest and kind of move more towards present day. But because of the advocacy and causes that are near and dear and close to her, I'm gonna give her a moment to talk about something that's relevant and more recent going on, and then we will get into her background. But Jamie, you're free to share what you need to share.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you giving me an opportunity to talk about this as well, especially because your audience is Black people who are in the industry. In 2021, my family was completely shocked when our son, who was 17 years old, was diagnosed with a rare kidney disease. I mean, healthy athlete, we eat right, it really shocked us. We were quickly kind of thrust into the advocacy side of things because I have a social work background and I did some research, and our doctor connected our son to a clinical trial. What we later discovered is the kidney disease that my boys have is actually genetic. So my next son, Jordan, was then diagnosed later the next year. So then we had 2 of our 6 children with this genetic disease that, as a Black parent, I'd never heard of. And so we have just used our platform to advocate for better screening, reducing barriers between medical professionals and the Black community. And we want to let people know that 1 in 7 people of Afro-Caribbean descent actually carry the gene that has basically changed, and that gene can cause kidney disease, and it's often undetected. So we just try to use our voice to do as much as we can to talk about this so that people don't have to be afraid. There's so many opportunities to get tested, know if you have the gene, and then there's better treatment options today. So you've probably never heard of that either, I'm guessing.
I have not. I had to look it up, but
Yeah. So, I mean, medical things can be scary, but it's one of those situations where if you know that you have the gene, it doesn't mean you'll necessarily get sick, but you can screen for it better. You can talk to your medical provider. And we even had the opportunity to go to Ghana last year, which is where the gene actually mutated. And so to go back to the motherland for a cause like that, but then also to be able to see the beauty in Africa was just, it was amazing. So, it's been a challenge, but it's given us the opportunity to persevere and grow. My boys are now 21 and 27, and they're both doing very well health-wise, and we continue to advocate.
well, I think the most important thing is that they are healthy and able to manage it, and you want to be able to create. It's good that you want to be able to create awareness, so that all the situations can end up like the one you're in the event that somebody does get diagnosed, and just in general in the Black community. As far as staying on top of our health, I know we have a lot more information out now than we have in the past, and I think people are aware of it. But there are not as many of us that are actually putting the things into practice. And this is in reference kind of more to your chronic, kind of lifestyle illnesses and diseases. But then you also have things that are genetic that are definitely less common, but we need to be aware of those things as well. So I think it's a double-edged sword. So I appreciate you sharing that, Jamie. So yeah, just to kind of put an emphasis on that and to get a little bit of a background on you, Jamie. You mentioned you have a social work background, yet somehow you ended up working in the audio space. So can you just share a little bit about the process for how that kind of actually happened?
Sure. So I have a master of social work and I have experience working with survivors of crime as what's called a forensic interviewer. So I interview children who have experienced or witnessed physical abuse, sexual abuse, or even homicide. And then I testify in court for the purpose of a criminal investigation. So about 8 years ago, my brother came to me and told me he was starting a podcast company and they were covering a true crime story. And I remember saying to him, like, you don't even know anything about crime. Like, what are you and Payne doing? But their podcast really got very popular. And now they've built an entire company since then where they cover all kinds of cases. And so what has been interesting about it is over time, there's just been more opportunities for me to step in and to interview some of the survivors of crime and to do my part to also make sure that as we tell stories that we're aware of the victims, that there are real people behind these stories. And I went from, just researching to moving forward and being able to interview and then writing scripts, worked on Freeway Phantom and just a lot of other projects. So it's been really great.
Cool. So having firsthand like worked on a good portion of the stuff that Tenderfoot has produced, and you being there even before and still being there now. I think the biggest adjustment for me was like, I guess I was excited about the skill that I had developed that I was being put to use, and even more, a little more responsibility that I had before going from an editor to an associate producer. But once I actually started getting into the stories and stuff, some of the stuff can be morbid. Some of I feel like it kind of can have an effect on you, especially when you're a person who wants to, similar to you, Jamie, like actually understand that these are real people's lives that have been affected, and not just like, oh, I'm just doing my job. It's just a story. There is a storytelling aspect of it. There are production aspects of it, but at the end of the day, it's like, this is whatever particular event happened, like it happened to someone, and someone, either they have to move forward with that, or unfortunately they may still not be here because of it. But there are people that they loved and that love them that are still here, that could be, riding down the street one day and, maybe hear a story on the radio, or somebody, you hear a podcast has come out about this particular event that has affected you. And for the people who create it, it's also important that we kind of have that perspective as well, and not get desensitized to the fact that there are a lot of these stories out there, unfortunately, but you don't want to ever lose the frame of mind that somebody has been impacted. How do you think that has helped you, along with your previous forensic interviewer skill, kind of help create something that people who have no connection to it at all can enjoy it, but the people that are connected to it, there's a level of respect for them in it as well?
Yeah, and I think, even when you and I work together, I immediately sense that about you, that you are a caring and compassionate person. So I've been really lucky to work with other people that share that sentiment, right? Because while we are telling stories and you do not need someone's permission to tell their story, we do try to reach out to families and we want to help highlight their stories. And when we aren't able to get a family's consent, it still is important to make sure that we're researching and fact checking because you want to get it right. You don't want to victim blame. And these stories are, like you said, they're real people and they didn't want to be thrust into the spotlight like this. Most people, and even people that do agree to speak with us, they're only often doing so to highlight their case because it's been underrepresented. We see that a lot, especially with Black and Brown, Indigenous families. They don't want the spotlight. They just want to know what happened to their loved one.
Mm-hmm. I guess I never actually I thought about it in one capacity, but a lot of these times these things are like unsolved, so there's no really no sense of like closure really for those affected. And so for, more stuff in the media to come out, I could see how that could be even more difficult. But definitely it helps to be surrounded by, other people who are involved in the process of creating it to have just as much compassion as you do. So I appreciate you sharing that aspect of it. But I would assume there were some challenges from you going from forensic interviewing to actually getting into the audio world, which is different, and there's a technical aspect of it as well. And I know from engineering, some of your like remote interviews, you really don't like to get involved with the technical stuff if you don't have to. But I'm sure there were some things that you probably had to learn. There's some learning curves and things like
Yes.
that you had to get accustomed to. So can you share what some of those were?
Yes, I think it's important to note that absolutely that the technology part of it, I was like, oh my gosh, I do not want to learn this part of it. And the good thing is when you work on a team, one thing I learned is you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you have to be aware and have knowledge, right? And so when I came on to Tenderfoot as a regular employee, it was during COVID. So I spent so much time learning on YouTube or videos my colleagues sent me and to use different remote ways to record like you mentioned, and I create a lot of different docs so I could share that with our interview subjects and things like that. But I'm lucky because I work on a team like people like you who were willing to say, oh yeah, let me help you with this part of this so that we get the best audio quality. But yeah, I think that one thing that's unique about podcasting is that you have people who are specialists in different areas, but then we all come together, everyone brings the best part of what they can do, and then we make a really great product. So, yeah, so I mean, I did learn some things, even like Asana or different ways that we manage our projects. Taking a YouTube clip or a video clip, and it used to be easy to just send it to someone on my team and say, hey, I want to find this audio, license this audio, and rip this audio. I'll send it to you. But then if everyone else was busy on projects, I'm like, okay, where are my directions so I could do this myself, right? Yeah, so that's the best way for me to explain it.
I would assume that for you, because I know in the way that we worked, in the way just the kind of the beginning step for all of this is having to transcribe everything and try to find the best part. So I would assume that because that was when I really started using Descript heavily, and that's like a major tool um, that I was aware of. I didn't necessarily use it, but now that I've started using it, especially with putting out and releasing my own podcast, has just been super invaluable. But as you begin to develop your skill set and Tenderfoot continue to grow, and I honestly I did not know of Tenderfoot before I started working there, and then once I jumped in, I realized like, oh, there's a whole like contingency who's like they're like diehards. They really are into this stuff. And I know that you do for like these trade shows and things within the industry. I know you're kind of like one of the main representatives that gets sent out to like represent us and really just like be immersed in the industry and connect with other people in the industry. Were you kind of hesitant at all when you first started doing that? And then how's that kind of evolved as you began to get more comfortable in attending more of them?
Yeah, so before I worked at Tenderfoot, I would go to the conferences because I actually listened to true crime before Tenderfoot started.
Okay.
And so I didn't go as like a fan per se, but if Donald and Payne had a booth or something, I would go there. When Payne did his first live show, I went and helped and handed out flyers and things like that. So I already kind of knew the landscape, but I will never forget the first time that I was at a big podcast event and I looked around and I said, oh my gosh, this is the most diversity I've ever seen. So it was about year
Mm.
3. And then that night they had a mixer that was for Black podcasters and Black content creators. And so that was, I can't think of what year that was, 6 years ago, maybe. And it was so good to see the diversity. And then there started to be kind of a transition in the industry where people were talking more about advocacy and about caring for victim stories. And so my background is kind of how I ended up being invited to speak on panels by actually other podcast organizations. And so I really didn't plan for it to be something that I did often or to be part of my role here at Tenderfoot, but I really do appreciate the honor to do that, to be able to share the importance of these different things and how we can all come together to tell the stories. And I think probably within the last 4 years, there's been a big emphasis on the lack of coverage when victims are people of color. And so that again provided me with the opportunity to connect with people like the Black and Missing Foundation or the Gabby Petito Foundation that were working together to highlight this. So it kind of happened organically, but I do love it. I mean, I love people. I love learning. And being face to face with not only people who are listeners and supporters of our show, but also victims' families who, want us to cover their story. I feel that is an honor, to be honest with you, because I'm able to see the impact of the work that we do.
Yeah, that's I think that for me, when considering Tenderfoot or kind of just seeing that, there was an opportunity to work at Tenderfoot and then doing my research, I was like, this really feels like, because I'm a type of person like I really don't like to work on stuff that is actually impactful to me, whether it's advocacy, whether it's, I don't know, there has to be some angle for me for it's just like or it's bigger than just podcast, or it's a TV or a film. There has to be some type of message. There has to be something that I can take with me away from it, when I'm doing it. So that's definitely present within Tenderfoot. And I also think probably within the true crime community for people who, do it the way that Tenderfoot actually does it. And you said you really enjoy like the learning that has gone into this. And obviously you had the interviewing and the advocacy that's kind of a part of you. And then you come into a realm where there's a technological aspect, there's a learning curve, but then you work through that. I guess outside of those, like what are some things just from being in audio, from Tenderfoot specifically, or within the industry as a whole, that you were kind of surprised that you kind of took a liking to or interest to, or some of the things that you learned that have been surprising?
Yeah, so I think, when you're a forensic interviewer, you're speaking with someone, you're gathering the story, and then you hand that story off as part of a criminal investigation. With Tenderfoot, when I had the opportunity to actually craft the story, so I was no longer just researching and conducting interviews, but I was able to actually help write an episode of Freeway Phantom, which was the podcast that I worked really closely with Trevor Young from iHeart on, and we got to know the families and things like that. And we brought on someone to write, but we knew the story best. And so I remember at one time I'm in a meeting and I was just saying, well, I really, in my brain, I heard it this way. And then, I saw the story kind of laying out differently. And then I was just we're sitting in a meeting and then Donald says, okay, well then you guys write it. And I remember at that moment being like, well, I didn't say I wanted to write it. Can I write it? What does this look like? And I was, again, that partnership though, I mean, this was in partnership with iHeartMedia, and Trevor Young has a lot of experience. So I learned to outline a story and make sure I hit the story beat and what's the cliffhanger sound like, what keeps people in the story. And so it was also how to tell a story where advocacy is within the story, but we're not kind of in someone's face the whole time saying, you shouldn't do this and you're racist. It's like, let them kind of come to their own assumption about why these girls' story was not important at that time and how racism still impacts investigations today. So that's a long answer, but I think to me, it's just really thinking about how I've been able to go from just being like on the front end of a story and like gathering information and then passing it on to being able to see that story come to life through every different stage and every process in the production.
I'm glad you touched on that, because you're talking about, from where you started with not being involved in like the whole process, just kind of passing things along. I think a big thing in the world in general is just like people may be involved in the process who have like good intentions. They may do an interview or something, if they're related to it, like they have the purest of intentions of getting the story out and telling it from the way it needs to be told, which is the truth. But then you have these like entities or people who actually have control over what is actually put out, and the way they kind of piece it together may not have the same intent as some of the people that were involved. You can kind of, it's the power of editing. You can kind of, lose context, the full context of things. And then if somebody, they put it out and people are involved, it's like, yo, this is not what I thought it was going to be. So from transitioning to having kind of being more involved and having control over that, I'm sure that's probably an ideal place for people who are advocates and do the work that you do. That would be more of an ideal situation. So I'm sure you're happy to be more involved in that process. I actually want to talk about the writing part you mentioned as well, because really that's the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of media, especially. But writing is not a sexy thing. It's not that you don't need you don't need a computer. You don't need one. People use them. But you don't need lighting. You don't need all these props, whatever. It's just a writing utensil, something to write it on in your brain. And for me, the reason why I kind of avoided writing and seeing the value in it for so long is because it takes an extreme amount of focus to do it well. And with today, with so many distractions, and I'm not talking at anyone, like I'm including myself in this category, like sitting down to write and things like that is not as easy as you would make it seem once you actually have to go through the process. And then you have to get good at it, which takes more time. So I don't know, like I'm kind of embracing it more because at the end of the day, like I started doing things from a technical standpoint, but the more you can do, the more valuable you are. So I would recommend anybody do anything in media or even outside of it, because no matter what field you're in, if you're creating content at all, you're going to have to be able to write well. And I know the context in which you do it, it may be a little different than somebody just journaling or brain dumping or whatever. But from what you have learned from the process that you all use to write things, what have you learned the most about it in general?
So, it's really important to make sure that you're checking all your sources, because you can have 10 sources with different information. So I really like to pull records whenever I can. So I'm ensuring that what I'm communicating when I'm writing a story is as accurate as possible. In an unsolved case that's more recent, it's really hard to get case docs from law enforcement or
Mm-hmm.
government agencies. But if it's a case that's a cold case, like there's a lot of time in between, law enforcement will often communicate more. So again, those sources are really important to me, making sure that we're communicating things correctly. Then again, like you said, writing is just such a special skill. I don't use any type of writing assistance or, anything like that, AI or things like that. I actually just write, and I like to write when it's completely quiet. There's no distraction. So for me, I find myself writing 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning often, which is not ideal, but it's life happens. I have, children and family life. And even though I work during the day, it's when I find the most just silence, where I can
Mm-hmm.
just write. And then I also think it's important to have someone that is willing to kind of be your partner in the process, right? Someone else who knows the story well. You want to always fact check, things like that. Then I also think it's important to remember that, like you said, writing isn't sexy. There are details sometimes in true crime stories that might grab someone's attention, but I always find myself asking, do I need to share this detail to communicate the important pieces of the story? Because I don't want to communicate things that are so gory or so off-putting or harmful to the family. For me, that's really, really important. We left out a lot of things from case documents in Freeway Phantom because what happened to those girls was absolutely horrific. But would sharing that information in any way, you know, help the story, or would it be hurtful to the family? So, I mean, those are some of my things that I keep in mind when I'm writing and crafting a story. And again, it's a team effort at Tenderfoot. You start with an outline, you write, then people say, oh, we want to make sure we add this. Let's take out that. And this is a great cliffhanger. Let's add some music here, whatever's going to help keep people listening, because you draw people in, but you want people to complete episodes and to complete, especially if it's a limited series. Because that's important to the family. At the end is when we're going to have that call to action, and when we're going to see, if people actually submit tips and make a difference in the story. So,
You mentioned fact checking a lot, and that's a term that I see a lot. I'm sure other people see it too, but I never really seen anybody really go into detail about like the process for that, which I think is important. Just saying, having the word and people being familiar with the word, but not being familiar with really what's going on. It's important. So like, what is your process for that, or what do you think are some things people should consider when it's time for them to do something similar?
Yeah, so for me, I start with a story and then I grab every piece of media I can on it and I put it in a Google Sheet and I watch everything. If there's a short doc on it, if there's another podcast episode, I'll listen to it. And what I'm looking for is consistency. So if something stands out to me as, oh, wait a minute, this was said in this article, but then this was in the podcast and it was different. I will even reach out to the journalist or to the podcaster and we can discuss the case if they're open to it. So it's just that kind of thing. Because again, if it's a case that is not solved, you're not going to be able to get police reports and things like that most of the time. If it's a case where I can access police documents, then that's, I don't want to say easy, but much easier. I can complete a FOIA request. I can use Pacer or other online archival sources and court sources to pull information. And then you can literally see times are stamped there. I've had cases before where I've listened to everything that's online or in the media about a case, and I've found a few articles. But then when I actually pull the case docs, like even the time is wrong when the person was last seen. Where somehow that little piece of information that's incorrect gets quickly, kind of accepted as the truth, and then it's on everything, but it isn't even
Right.
the truth. And then you have to remember things like today. There's no fact checking on so many of our stories. I am not anti TikTok, but we have had so many stories submitted through TikTok, and then I'll request court documents or do some additional digging. And what was on there is not at all what I have found in like
Hmm.
the hard facts. And that's hard sometimes because general societies like, you guys should cover this case. You should cover this case. You should cover this. And there might be other reasons we don't choose to cover it.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's not just a fit, but other times we find through fact checking that if we did cover it, it would probably not be, I don't want to say well received, but if you have to tell the whole story, is what I'm trying to say,
Hmm.
and in a, 30-second, 20-second clip on TikTok, you're just hitting the things that keep people listening and draws them in, right? And those aren't easy decisions to make because I wish we can cover every story. I think they're all equally important. But sometimes they can cause more harm than good, especially if you're not fact checking and telling the truth in what you're covering.
Yeah, I think that for me, I think the reason for that is because basically like anybody can like do media really now, like you know what I'm saying. So it's like a gift and a curse because like you have the freedom to if you want to create something, but something that may require like factual information. Like I feel like people from journalistic backgrounds they kind of stay true to it more, but if you don't have that background you really don't understand that aspect of it at all. Like you said, people could just kind of just go for headlines and put out really, whatever they want to put out or present it in a way that's kind of favorable to like how they view it as opposed to the whole truth. So I know we've talked about some heavy things because honestly, the nature of the job that's what's necessary. But I would assume that, and you mentioned, you have 6 children, you have a family life, which obviously is a lot more positive and different vibe from the work that you're doing. So, does it ever get to points where you're kind of like this is kind of too much for like right now or one day like, I need to step away because no matter like I mean for you it's because of the subject matter you can get burnt out on this type of stuff. For some people it's like I don't know if for me like when I'm more I do a lot of technical stuff too. So if I'm like editing or mixing an episode, like my ears get tired and I'm like I gotta take a break. I gotta just do something else. Is that something that you kind of have built in, or you kind of just go that way when it comes? Like it's kind of like a natural feeling in the moment.
Yeah, when you're a social worker and you've worked in trauma for a long time, I'm really aware of the importance of, and I hate the word self-care because it's overused, but it's an important word. Like the importance of honestly having the emotional intelligence to say, I need a break. I should work on something else. Obviously I can't do that when we're in major production with deadlines and timelines. But I remember saying, as a joke one day, I was like, I want to work on something funny next. Like, I need a funny story to work on.
Right.
And we do have some light shows at Tenderfoot too, Rattled and Shook and Radio Rental. And while I don't work on those, if I get the opportunity to pull some extra crazy, silly stories versus it being a murder or true crime, there are times when I will offer my services to do that. Because I also do a lot of outreach with our families. And so once you reach out to a family and you're talking to them about the case, you have this sense of like obligation to continue communicating with them and checking in because they've shared such a vulnerable part of themselves. But it is important to have family that keeps you grounded. I mean, my husband is great. When we would go on road trips, there's like a no true crime rule. Like, even though I used to listen to true crime before I worked in it, I can't listen to anybody's true crime. He's like old school rap jazz. You choose anything else, but you cannot listen to true crime. Um, so that's important. And then there's times too when I know that it's okay to turn something off or um turn away, I guess is what I'd say. Because right now the world is heavy too, right? There's the political news, there's like all these things happening. So just knowing your limits and being able to take a break when you need it. And, just really that emotional intelligence to do so and to be able to advocate for yourself in the workplace, I think is really important.
Okay. Interesting perspective. So your husband says no true crime podcast. I know he like you mentioned he would rather listen to music. Have you ventured like into podcast land outside of true crime, or that's kind of just where you're comfortable? You're just going to kind of stay there for a while.
I mean, I've worked on some other things as far as research and early things with some of our other shows, but not really. And I think that it would be fun to do that. I've always joked saying, I'd love to do something about having adult children because everybody thinks, oh, raising 4-year-olds is hard. I'm like, oh, the stories I could tell about like raising teenagers or college kids, funny, appropriate stories, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a I think you got something with that. I don't know if I would have shared that if I was you, because people are gonna be listening to this, and they might have the capacity to actually do it before you. But raising adult children, I think, is a great perspective and an angle to talk about parenthood. I haven't seen that, so I will hold that. Don't give up on that one just yet.
I'll tell you, our daughter's in college and our I'm sorry. I brought my dog to work today, friends. It was not a good decision, but or parenting dogs. This is what you do when your kids go to college. But my daughter's in college and just the text messages with her are absolutely hilarious. I asked her if she needed an oil change the other day and she didn't know what an odometer was. I'm like, how is she driving and not knowing what an odometer is? But I mean, I have my husband and I had kids young, and so we just enjoy parenting them so much. It's just so fun.
Yeah, and I would assume like the younger you have them, you can relate to them a little bit more. So especially when they're between like college and like I don't know 30, I feel like it's quite or 28. When they get into their careers and then you see them transition, they're like everywhere doing this, doing that, operate on little sleep, getting home late. And then you hit 30 and then that starts to slow down. I'm sure, seeing that as a parent is like, oh, now you're starting to understand like being an adult is, you get older, you have less energy, but more responsibilities. So, and all that stuff in between. So I think that would be interesting. Like I said, don't give up on that one. As far as audio stuff in general, because I know for me, I'm always saying for me, but I like to, ask guests or get guest perspective on things that kind of have come to me or I have realized. And I feel like, being in podcasting, like a lot of people get into it for a creative outlet, but then there's so much information you hear about, oh, Joe Rogan did a deal. I mean, I did a deal for $1 billion. Not really, but
No,
millions and millions of dollars.
It might be a billion.
Yeah, the way things are going, it's just all this stuff about the business of things, which inevitably has to happen. We live in a capitalistic society, but in some ways, it can kind of taint the original intent of things, but in some ways, if you really understand it and understand who you are and kind of try to stay true to why you got into it, but also being business savvy and having a business mindset, you can kind of get the best of both worlds. Are you into that at all? Have you learned anything about the business of podcasting during this time?
So, as you know, my brother Donald co-owns Tenderfoot. I said that earlier. To describe us, we're 15 months apart. I'm the social side, the advocacy. He's like the business mind. So I had made a promise to myself last year that I was going to learn more and understand the business side and downloads and how it translates to money and advertising, just because I wanted to grow professionally. So I have been meeting with one of my other colleagues because he doesn't have the time, just trying to understand all of that side of things. And I do have friends who are independent podcasters, and I understand how difficult it is for indie podcasters when there are the big names at the top, or the companies at the top, and they're trying to connect, and they're trying to make money, because you get into it to be creative, but you give your heart to this work. I mean, you guys work so hard, and it's hard to compete. One thing that I
Mm-hmm.
also did was I joined the Podcast Academy, which is an organization for all different types of podcasters. In the bar to, enter is low, it's affordable, and people can connect. I got a mentor through there to kind of understand the business side better. And then also, it's an opportunity for independent podcasters to submit their shows in order to win an Ambie Award, because it is much harder to compete with Joe Rogan, right? Or these bigger names. You're not, it's really, really difficult. So I do think I do want to understand it more, but I also think it's unfortunate, because the whole point of podcasting back in the day, I mean, I'm old, so back in the day, it was like, the bar to enter is, get a mic and put out some good content, and you can make at least some money. And what's happening now is, I don't know if it's just there's so many podcasts, or people are also on TikToks. There's so many different avenues out there to share stories, that it's changed. So with my friends that are indie podcasters, I just know how challenging it is for them. One thing that we've been trying to do a lot at Tenderfoot is trying to partner with indie podcasters so that we can do show swaps, or that we can have them on to read a critical missing segment and talk about their show. And that's just a way to try to, I mean, Tenderfoot started with two guys who didn't know what they were doing either, right? So how can we also be helpful in this space, because our company has grown? So not Joe Rogan grown, but
Yeah, no, yeah, nobody. I don't think it's realistic for anybody to be like, Joe Rogan is my competition. No, he's not. He is not. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the part about like collaborating with independent podcasters, because I worked on a show, True Crime, that started off outside of the Tenderfoot umbrella, and I think it was she did independently produce it. And then she ended up becoming part of the Tenderfoot team, and they continued the show. So there's a lot of opportunities, I guess, with just independent creators and production companies and agencies and things like that. Like, we don't really have time to get into the details of it, because honestly, probably don't know as much about that as to make it a topic of conversation. But that is just something to consider, and I'll make a note for myself to do research on that, and maybe it'll come up again in a future episode.
yeah.
But for somebody who looking to like get into podcasting, there's so many different tiers. I feel like the lowest barrier to entry one is just to do, shows like this, like interview style. But when you start getting into real like narrative storytelling, like what you do at Tenderfoot, it could become more complicated. But for people who want to dive in and kind of go straight there to that level, what do you think would be like skills that you should focus on, or some like best tips? So if they want to work, at a company like Tenderfoot one day, and do some edgy, interesting things, actually have a chance to break into it.
Sure. So I would say that if you have an interest for it, then that's probably where you're meant to be, regardless, right? I think that whatever's on our heart is what we're meant to do. Um, as I said earlier, you don't have to be the best at everything. I'm never going to edit audio. Like, I will just not be good. You don't want me to, right? But I should know the basics of it. And I should know, how to get to the point where then I'm handing it over to someone like you, which is what we did with True Crime. And then you're editing it after we've kind of put together what we want and we kind of have an idea there. But I would say lean on your skills that you know that you're really good at. Be open to exploring your skills and growing in what you learn, what you want to learn in your knowledge base. But then also, if you have a pitch, find a company that aligns with your values and tells the stories the way that you would like to tell yours. And don't be afraid to submit your pitch. I mean, that's how we now do get a lot of our newer shows, is that someone brings us a story and we think, oh, you've got this skill, whether it's research or even access to the story subjects. That's huge because we don't have access to everybody. So lean into what you have, what you know, have an idea of what you want to do with it, and then reach out if you want to partner with a company like Tenderfoot or some of the other companies out there.
So yeah, do what interests you with your artists, and
Yeah.
don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Um, More simply put, and I think, the simple things are often the hardest. Putting yourself out there, fear of rejection, following, your heart, and trying to make that work despite the path that you're supposed to be on, that you saw yourself on, or other people saw yourself on. Those things can often be the hardest.
No, absolutely. And, or even like you said, like fear of rejection. When we put out a show that I work on, like going to the comment section, my anxiety goes from like 2 to like 10 really quickly because people aren't always going to be kind. They aren't always going to receive it. But if you know that you did your best work and you know your intentions are good and you put out your best, you have to just know that and not be afraid, like you said, to shoot your shot and do your best work.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that insight. So last portion of the show, before I let you go, it's a little bit lighter, especially for this episode. Some of
Sorry.
the deep stuff we got into. But I just want to kind of know your taste and your I don't know, inspirations as far as things outside of the audio world. In regards to what you work on specifically, but it's still within the audio realm. So first question, it's a music question. Well, actually, all these are music questions. What is your favorite album of all time, or albums?
Oh my gosh, my husband is going to kill me. He is a music head, and I am so bad at remembering like albums, but I love Sade. I love, I'm trying to think. Alicia Keys, but I can't think of the album names. He'll make,
Oh no, it's cool. I know. I'm not familiar with Sade. And that's one of the reasons why I ask these questions. Because I'm trying to learn too. I'm always, look at it as a learning experience. So, but Sade and Alicia Keys. So the next question is a music producer question, but I don't know if you'll be able to. Just the first one that comes to mind. I don't know. But what is your favorite music producer?
I don't know. Oh, Brian Kennedy,
Who is who is Brian Kennedy?
my friend. He produces for Rihanna, and he actually
Ah,
also has the same rare kidney disease as my kids. And it's just
really?
yeah, I love him, and he's so talented. Look at Brian Kennedy. He doesn't just work with Rihanna, but he is such a good person. He's also an advocate, and he makes really good music. And he's won Grammys.
I seen he's been on R&B Money already, which is the authority for all things R&B. It's like Tank and his writing and producing partner Jay Valentine, I would check out your friend Brian Kennedy. So favorite music? Are you into movies at all?
Yeah, I like
Good.
movies.
Okay. Favorite music from a movie. I'm trying to ask this in a way that it's not as daunting. Because if I say favorite film score or soundtrack, you might be like, oh. But if I say favorite music from a movie, it might be get you there a little bit easier.
Like favorite music. I mean, I loved like Boys in the Hood. All the music was amazing. I don't know. I can't. I'm so bad. I'm like losing my coolness right here.
That's cool, but I mean, we're getting there. So the music from Boys in the Hood. Okay, yeah, that's a good one. We don't have to dive much deeper. I'll take that. So the last one is favorite TV theme song
Oh my gosh.
from like a sitcom.
Yeah, like moving on up.
The facts of life. So you're one of those people. You don't just say the thing. You gotta like do
I
the
gotta
lyrics
sing
and all
it.
that stuff. So yeah, So you said moving up. Okay, so from the Jeffersons.
I love that. That just brings me back to like my childhood, and like we would sing and dance to that when it came on.
It is catchy. You can't help. It's a make you want to dance kind of song jingle. So definitely understood. Okay, I'm gonna take the pressure off you. That's the last one. So
Thank God.
I appreciate your answers. I saw you start to sweat a little bit when I start answering these
Because
questions.
my husband would die. He's like, he knows every song, and I'll say, honey, what's that song I like? And he's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm not a music girl.
It's cool. It's cool. But overall, I just appreciate you sharing everything, sharing your background, sharing your taste, and answering some of those not so easy, kind of more difficult questions to answer. So I appreciate it, Jamie. So before we jump off, can you just share, as far as Tenderfoot, any Tenderfoot productions or things going on right now that you would like to shout out?
Sure. As you mentioned, we have a season 2 of Truer Crime that's out right now. It's doing really well. I worked on that. I'm also working on a project that actually is right in my community. A young lady that was found, unfortunately, dead near a pool. Her name was Mercedes Chico Sims. And this will be the closest case I ever work on. She went to school with one of my sons. So
Oh
really
wow.
close to home, but we're hoping to get that family some coverage, and working on a few wrongful conviction stories. And then we have a new show called Up and Vanish Weekly, where I had the opportunity to be a special guest last week and talk about a case from about 29 years ago. So got my hands in a lot of different things, but I love the work. And I just wanted to say to you, you were such a joy to work with. And I really think you're such a good person. And I'm excited that you have a new show that's out. And I mean, I will definitely support.
Oh yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jamie. And check out some of the Tenderfoot stuff she mentioned as well. Very tastefully and well done. I can attest to it firsthand. So thank you for coming on again, Jamie. Please support her in any way that you can. And yeah, for those listening, I guess we'll catch you on the next one. Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a review. If you'd like to work with me or connect, please go to soundbysid.com and schedule a call. There you can also check out the full list of productions I've worked on. If you'd like to connect on social media, my handle is soundbysid.com on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm Sidney Evans on LinkedIn. Don't forget to follow Beyond the Threshold on Instagram as well. I'll catch you on the next episode.